Welcome into the first crossover Thursday for both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs. I'm Kevin Ostreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens. He is Chris Clark, the Locked On Chiefs host, one of those over there. And we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs your first listens of the day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, you got YouTube in video form. You can like and subscribe. You can follow along with us in audio form as well. Today's crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks alongside Locked On Chiefs. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. PrizePicks, run your game. Well, this is a game day episode for both of us, Chris. Obviously, the Ravens and Chiefs opening up their season today in Arrowhead in Kansas City. The defending two-time Super Bowl champions back-to-back and three-time total for that Chiefs team going up against the Ravens in an AFC Championship rematch. I think this is the game that everybody wanted to see happen in the opening game of the season. How are you feeling about this one?
I feel really good about it right now. I think it's other than not having Hollywood Brown, you got to feel pretty good with where Kansas City is. I think that their offense is going to be better than it was last year. We're going to get into that when we get into the biggest storylines. But I feel really good about this game right now. I think the team looks focused, and they are all about this season. Everything about last season is gone. They don't want to talk about last season. They don't want to talk about three-peat. They just want to talk about what they're going to do this year and how they're going to attack teams this year.
And the Ravens are the exact same way. Their media availabilities and what they have said, obviously, they are of the mindset of, look, last year was disappointing what happened in Baltimore here, but the Chiefs are in the way of the Ravens right now, much like the Ravens are in the way of the Chiefs right now to a 1-0 start for both teams. You know, Kansas City last year coming off of their Super Bowl loss to Detroit in the opening game, and that's going to be maybe the Chiefs do, maybe they don't, but the Ravens have an opportunity here to get off to a fast start, much like the Chiefs do. But let's start with the Ravens, Chris, as we go into some biggest storylines for them. First, we'll talk about Chiefs in the second segment. The biggest storyline for the Ravens coming into the game offensively, there are a lot of them. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is a big one, but protecting Lamar Jackson is going to be a big thing for Baltimore. The Chiefs have a pretty vaunted defensive front, obviously led by Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, and friends. The Ravens lost 60% of their starters on the offensive line. Kevin Zeitler is now in Detroit. Morgan Moses and John Simpson both with the Jets. And they're replacing them not with veterans, but with youth. They have a vet in Patrick McCary who is set to suit up at right tackle on the unofficial depth chart. But other than that, it's a first-year player in Andrew Voorhees, who missed his entire season last year, and Daniel Faalele, who is pretty raw at the guard position. It's a big test for the Ravens offensive line early in the season, and especially in a game that you'd really like to have if you're Baltimore, and both with the run game and the pass game. It all starts up front for both of these teams, particularly for the Ravens on the offensive side of the ball.
Can't say I disagree with you, and that's going to be something that's definitely going to be a focus for Kansas City to try to attack all those new offensive linemen. And it's not just the new offensive linemen. I mean, you can still attack the guys that were there last year. When you start talking offensive line play, you start talking about chemistry, how those guys work together, how they're going to pass off stunts and twists and all that fun stuff. And that's really what it's going to come down to is how do they work together as a unit? And, having a 60% turnover from one year to the next is not going to be fun. And when you start looking again, it's, you go to a practice or a preseason where you only have 3 games and some teams play their starters, some don't. You just don't get game snaps. And it's different than training camp. It's a different pace. It's different in everything. So I'm really curious to see how that line shakes out.
And 2 different preseason approaches for both of these teams. The Chiefs obviously playing their guys and getting them acclimated, the rust getting shaken off in those games. The Ravens, the opposite, which is they did not play their starters. And so maybe there is a little bit of rust. Who knows? Obviously, the Chiefs lost Marquise Brown for this game in the preseason. He will not be suiting up, as you mentioned earlier, Chris. But the other part of this for the Ravens offense is Derrick Henry is the new addition, but the heavy personnel looks the Ravens could bring out against this Chiefs team. You have Patrick Ricard. You have your 2 tight ends that are expected to be on the field together a lot this season in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. So if you want to run heavy personnel with that group, the Chiefs have to have personnel to match that, and they certainly do. But how would you expect the Chiefs to go about trying to stop Derrick Henry, those heavy looks, especially if the Ravens run play action off of that and try to get Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely involved?
I think that's one of the key things here for Kansas City is when you look at this Baltimore team, one of the things that has been so hard in the past is Lamar is a dual threat quarterback. And I know you're talking about Derrick Henry in the run, but it kind of plays into the same aspect of it in my mind. Is in Lamar wants to run to an extent, even when he's trying to pass at times, and that makes it so much harder to defend the pass. But when you start looking at the running game, their running game's been okay, but it hasn't been great. Now you have a talent that has been phenomenal in the NFL over the past several seasons, and you have to think that that's going to be something that they're going to take advantage of. And when I look at it, the big question is they got some road graders that they have as their starting guard and their right tackle right now, and then you start looking at it from the aspect of, okay, well, they haven't played a lot together, so are they going to be rusty? Are they going to be able to hit the running lanes and hit the blocks that they need to be hitting early on? This is a huge game for both teams, and both teams need to start the season 1-0 because this game could matter when it comes down to playoff seeding in January.
You're exactly right. And I always say September games don't matter in September, but they sure as heck do in December. And that is exactly when you talk about those standings and everything. Every game counts, especially against an AFC rival opponent where you're right, you could be fighting for seeding, conference record, all of that matters. But moving to defense, Chris, for the Ravens, they did lose a lot of talent. Guys like Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, that list goes on and on and on. And they're replacing a lot of those guys again with youth. So Adafe Owe stepping up for Clowney, Trenton Simpson stepping up for Patrick Queen. But one of the big storylines defensively is how do you stop Kansas City in this Patrick Mahomes offense that now has added weapons? Now Marquise Brown, again, not available, but Xavier Worthy with that speed element. Roquan Smith had some comments to the media a couple of days ago where he was asked, just what do you do against this Patrick Mahomes-led offense? And he said, well, you got to make them one-dimensional, stop the run, take that element out. And that caused a lot of controversy on both Ravens and Chiefs social media I saw. So I want to get it from you, Chris. What do you feel about those comments? Is the way to slow down or stop this offense making them one-dimensional and taking out that run game?
Good luck with that. That's all I'm going to say. I look at that and I laughed. I saw what he said. I get it to an extent because when you start looking at it and when you want to just kind of be giving somebody an answer without really giving them a real answer, saying words but not really saying something, this is the kind of answer that you get. Because what do you talk about when you talk about football? You talk about trying to make a team one-dimensional. So it makes a ton of sense from that aspect. I don't think that's what you want to do against this Chiefs team, though. You're going to make this team one-dimensional and you're going to put the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hand. I think Andy Reid will take that every day of the week and 2 or 3 times on Sunday. And I think the rest of the Chiefs offense will as well. I'm curious to see how it turns out because I also know that Pacheco has worked his butt off this year. He has looked fantastic in camp. He came in healthy, which he hasn't been the past several years. He's had to have some surgeries after the Super Bowls. And so he came in at 100% healthy. He's been catching the ball out of the backfield, in training for that, trying to become a more well-rounded running back. So I do think that could play into this as well. Again, like I said, good luck with that because I'm really curious if they want to really try to get it to where Pacheco runs the ball 5 to 10 times. I'm pretty sure Patrick Mahomes would be happy. And with the weapons, which we'll talk about here in the next segment, I think that the rest of this Chiefs team would still be pretty happy as well.
Yeah, I kind of took it the way that you had said initially, the first part of your answer, where you do want to make a team one-dimensional. Now, for Patrick Mahomes, is there stopping him? Probably not. You can slow him down as best you can, but he's going to get a couple of plays on you at least because, well, let's face it, he's Patrick Mahomes. So
Patrick, Kyle Hamilton last year had one of those plays. I mean, Kyle Hamilton, and I don't want to cut you off too much, but I do want to say this: Kyle Hamilton had a fantastic game against the Chiefs. And I know that there are a lot of people that say he got beat by Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is one of the best tight ends that's ever played football. I think he's probably the best. And that touchdown pass he caught was a perfect pass. There is almost no defense for it at all whatsoever. And sometimes, no matter how good of a player you are, you're going to get beat by somebody making a perfect play.
Yeah, I would rather, hype up the play itself and say, yeah, that was a heck of a throw, heck of a catch, than rag on Kyle Hamilton for it because Hamilton was in pretty much perfect position, but Mahomes just made a better throw against perfect position. And that's the type of player Mahomes is. We all know that. So, again, you can try to make the Chiefs one-dimensional and try to slow down Patrick Mahomes. The defense for the Ravens certainly has a lot in front of them, especially with first-time defensive coordinator Zach Orr now at the helm instead of Mike McDonald. Coming up with the second part of the show, we are going to be flipping it over to the Chiefs side, talking about the biggest storylines offensively and defensively. So stay tuned for that. We have a lot to get to on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs. First, this show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. So all you do is you pick more or less on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, and watch the winnings roll in. So, for example, one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. It's 4 weeks of free W. So don't miss that deal over on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. Now, Prize Picks puts their members first. So all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when my picks hit, I can get that money in as quick as 15 minutes. So for Prize Picks, obviously this Ravens and Chiefs game, there are a lot of players. Maybe you want to go Lamar Jackson, more passing yards than projected. Maybe you want to go Patrick Mahomes, more passing yards than projected. All of that is available to you over on Prize Picks. Even maybe if you want to go Xavier Worthy having a big game, more than 90 receiving yards, or maybe you're a Rashad Bateman believer, you could go more than 90 on Rashad Bateman too. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. We return. It is our second segment of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs here on this Game Day Thursday. Happy game day. Happy start to the NFL season for everybody. Ravens fans, Chiefs fans, just general NFL fans. I am Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens. He is Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs, and we are here for you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you again for making both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs your first listen. Be sure to make Locked On Fantasy Football your second listen. I have about 20-plus fantasy leagues, and I have taken the advice of our Locked On Fantasy experts over there, so be sure to check that out. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, Chris, I want to flip it over to the Chiefs because there are a lot of storylines for the back-to-back champions, and obviously Mahomes with that 3-time Super Bowl, those rings on his fingers. For offense, Mahomes, the weapons, everything, what are you looking at for Kansas City in this game?
What do their weapons look like when it actually comes to matter? You look at last year, and one of the things that they struggled with the entire season was their wide receivers. They struggled with drops. I think I know they led the NFL in drops last year. MVS is gone. Tony is gone. You're in a situation now where your top wide receiver is probably out. I would say that Hollywood Brown has looked at being the wide receiver 1 for Kansas City, although I think that there's a pretty good argument that Rashee Rice is really probably that guy, and he will be showing that later this season. I don't know that it'll start that way, but I think he'll end up wide receiver 1 for this team. Then you look at Xavier Worthy, and everybody says that everybody wants to say he's a speed guy, and he is a speed guy, but he can do so much more than speed. If you go back and watch week 2 against the Lions, and he runs a route, he's on the same side of the ball as Travis Kelce, and he notices the setup of the defense, watches what happens with Travis, adjusts his route, and Mahomes sets up for almost a 40-yard gain. He read the defense, and I know that may seem small, but that's huge for rookie wide receivers coming in to be able to do that, and especially in an Andy Reid defense or an Andy Reid offense when you're sitting there with so much on your plate and having to do so much. It is a huge deal to be able to step in and do that. So I'm really curious, and I think that's the big storyline is what does this offense look like? Because you have a situation now where you have potentially a new star wide receiver in Xavier Worthy. Rashee Rice was pretty good at the end of the year last year, and even better in the playoffs. And the other big question on offense is, what is your starting left tackle going to look like? Kingsley Suamataia is a rookie. He's going to be going up against Adafe, and how's that matchup going to go? When we talk about key matchups, that's going to be one of mine is those two right there. And that is a big storyline in this because he is protecting the franchise and he's protecting the face of the NFL, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I think to me, with the Ravens defense and their secondary, right? Xavier Worthy, he's not just a speed star. I 100% agree with you on that, Chris. But that speed element is going to be so big for Kansas City this year.
It's huge.
Now, the Ravens went out there and they drafted Nate Wiggins, who is a speed corner, sub 4.3 speed at the 40. And it's not even just the Chiefs, but the NFL, some of these teams are moving towards that speed offense, getting those speedsters on the outside, and Nate Wiggins with his recovery speed. I would expect to see Nate Wiggins and Xavier Worthy maybe battle it out a little bit in this game, but also it's Marlon Humphrey, who is hopefully going to have a rejuvenated season after struggling with injuries last year for the Ravens. Brandon Stevens, who stepped up in a big way. And with Marquise Brown out, you could say, well, if Marquise Brown was healthy, it would be the trio of Brown, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy against the Ravens trio of Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, and Nate Wiggins. Now, who's that third guy for the Chiefs now that Marquise Brown's not going to play? Is that a Juju Smith-Schuster? Is that a Justin Watson? Who is that in your mind?
So if you're just talking wide receiver, it's probably going to be Justin Watson. I think Juju is going to have a part, but I don't think week one is going to be where his emphasis is going to be. And I think Watson is a guy that Mahomes trusts. So if you're looking at strictly wide receiver, I think it's going to be Watson. But the reality is even though I said, Rashee Rice is probably wide receiver one, the top reality in this offense is that it runs through Travis Kelce. And he is such a unicorn at the position. And don't get me wrong, like I said before, Kyle Hamilton is a phenomenal player. But that's a huge matchup for this and how it sets up the rest of the offense. With Kelce being able to do what he does, if Hamilton can cover him one-on-one, that completely changes what Baltimore can do on defense. But at least Kansas City in this situation has more weapons than they did last year facing the Ravens because you go into that game, Rashee Rice was playing well, but other than Rashee Rice and Kelce, I don't think that you would feel very good about that receiving core at all.
And we had talked about that, you and I, a lot over the course of the offseason of, well, they need to upgrade their wide receivers in some way, shape, or form. And I was very impressed with what they did. And also, I also don't believe Travis Kelce was healthy for the entirety of the year last year. So
he wasn't.
A rejuvenated Travis Kelce could cause some problems, not just for the Ravens, but obviously for everybody else in the league. Now, defensively, Chris, this is a team that did lose L'Jarius Sneed. He gets traded over to the Tennessee Titans. They're going to be relying on some youth in that secondary. What are some of your biggest storylines for that particular unit?
It's going to be who's going to be stepping up and going to take over the cornerback 2 position. Trent McDuffie is obviously corner 1. There's no doubt about that at all whatsoever. There is a little bit of a question, and this is going to be something I'm going to be very curious to watch as to how they deploy the corners in this game because Trent McDuffie switched between inside and outside a lot during the preseason, and you have to wonder, he was an all-pro as a slot corner last year. Are they going to keep him at the slot? Are they going to move him outside and try to have somebody else in the slot, and who is going to be that guy? So right now the biggest storyline is who's going to be CB2, and that may lead into who's going to be CB3. But the other side of it is you return most of the rest of this defense. I mean, yeah, you're missing Willie Gay, but you step in with Drew Tranquill. I think that you have to feel like that's kind of close to a push. Not quite, because Tranquill doesn't have the same speed that Gay does. And that really helped with a guy like Lamar Jackson and Spine. But I do think that this is going to be a very fun game to watch. And I'm curious to see how the defense plays. I do know that this is going to be big. And we did talk about this a little bit earlier. When you start looking at Derrick Henry, you have to be able to stop the run. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kansas City has a guy like Mike Pennell on this roster right now. And if you go back and watch the Super Bowl, Mike Pennell actually took Trent Williams one-on-one on several plays and took over and took care of what needed to be done. And that is something that doesn't happen to Trent Williams very often. Not saying he's going to be able to do that very well in every single snap, but it's something to watch because it is going to be such a big key to be able to get off blocks and contain Henry and don't let him get to the second level with a burst of speed.
Yeah, and you mentioned stopping the run, and obviously that is one of the things that the Chiefs were able to do to prevent the Ravens from winning the AFC Championship game, but also that was majority of the Ravens just didn't run the ball, and they kind of played into what Steve Spagnuolo did. So they stopped the run, not by literally stopping it on the field at times, but Steve Spagnuolo stopped it himself by baiting the Ravens into certain looks and making them do certain things, and it was a chess match that obviously Steve Spagnuolo won against that Ravens offense. And I think now with Derrick Henry in the picture, could it be different? I mean, I would hope they don't run the ball 6 times with Derrick Henry. That would be would maybe even be worse than what happened in the AFC Championship game, obviously except the stakes. But what do you think the Chiefs will do to try to combat Derrick Henry, not just with what you mentioned earlier, but in terms of making sure that they have to get one-dimensional, much like we kind of talked about in the first segment with the Ravens?
I think that they're going to bring in some power, and I think that you have Chris Jones maybe line up at the end a couple of times. George Karlaftis is going to be your defensive end to an extent, and then you bring in a guy like Derek Nottie and Mike Pennell on those downs where you think they're going to be running the ball, and you get 2 run stuffers in the middle of the defense. They also brought up a kid from the practice squad that I think will be active this game, that I think is going to help them and give them a little bit of extra, meat in the middle. This is going to be something where they're going to have to keep their defensive tackles as fresh as they possibly can. And while I would understand that they wouldn't necessarily want Chris Jones on the outside very often against the run, I do think that in some instances, in certain downs, that may be what they want to go with, because he can play defensive end to an extent, and he can play it well enough to be able to stop the run in that regard. And you need as much power as you can on the field to be able to bring Henry down. And like I said, if he gets to the second level, it becomes a much bigger issue. The Chiefs have great linebackers, but hitting Henry as a linebacker at the second level, and if he gets to the DBs, that's even worse.
Yeah, a lot of storylines for these two teams, a lot of keys. And coming up with the final part of the show, we're going to be getting into predictions and what each team needs to do to be able to take this one from the other and start off 1-0. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll be right back here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs. First, this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. Whenever hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools you have to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it's finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn has it all. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn knows how professionals can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses got a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here. Locked On Ravens, Locked On Chiefs. Game day. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens still here with Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs as we get ready for the NFL season opener here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button to both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs for your 5 days a week of Ravens and Chiefs coverage, video form and audio form. We are here for you wherever you decide to consume our content and get your podcast. Now, Chris, we're going to do a bunch of predictions, but also we'll start with the 3 most important things that each team has to do in order to win this game. So as the away team, I'll start this one off. I'll list 3, and then we'll get into it. For Baltimore, obviously one is you have to win the battle up front. We talked about how important this Ravens offensive line is in terms of one of the keys to the game, getting off to a fast start. Again, much like Patrick Mahomes, with this offensive line, I'm not sure there's any stopping Chris Jones, and maybe slow him down in the best way that you can, especially if you're one of those younger or inexperienced offensive linemen on that Ravens line trying to have a good debut. I also think that for the Ravens, establishing themselves on the ground will help a lot. If the Chiefs have to come up and stack that box to try to stop Derrick Henry or the threat of Lamar Jackson with his legs, we know Lamar's arm talent can certainly carry him. And to be able to have those guys creep up into the box and then work play action off of that, you can use Mark Andrews, you can use Isaiah Likely, and I think that's another big key is for the Ravens establishing that dominance on the ground, something they did not do in the AFC Championship game, and it cost them in multiple different ways. And finally, I think it is slowing down Travis Kelce. The Ravens have some people to throw at him, namely Kyle Hamilton, like we talked about earlier. I think that there are going to be some plays that Travis Kelce makes, right? If he's too good not to. But Hamilton is too good of a player, I think, for the most part, to have Travis Kelce go out there for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think it'll be a battle of 2 really, really, really good players. And so if the Ravens want to win this game, early, fast start at all 3 levels, I think is going to have to be what happens, because we know that even if that does happen, Patrick Mahomes can bring you back. But I think it's worse to let him in his chance where he can put you away, and that is probably the worst case scenario.
And I'm really happy with what you just said, and I think that you made a great point. It's got to be a fast start, and I think that actually goes for Kansas City as well. You look at this game, and you look at what happened to Detroit in the Detroit game. Kansas City kind of didn't really have, they didn't have Kelce, they didn't have Jones in that game. So they didn't have two of their three best players, which makes it hard to win any game in the NFL. But you also had an offense that just couldn't move the ball. They couldn't stay on the field. They couldn't do anything right. And in this situation, you have to start fast. If you get the ball first, you have to put it in the end zone. You need to get points on the board immediately. And I talked about this on the Locked On Chiefs show. One of the biggest things to me is Andy Reid needs to keep his foot on the gas. And it's not trying to be disrespectful to the Ravens, but it is trying to send a message, one, to the NFL, and send a message to the rest of the AFC that this Chiefs team is going to take it and go after teams. And I think that's what you need to do. You need to be aggressive in this game. So the keys, when I look at this, three things they need to do: start fast, win the turnover battle. If they can win the turnover battle, which they didn't do at all last year for the most part, they were one of the worst teams in the turnover difference, which is kind of funny considering where they went. And then really the third one is stop Derrick Henry. I think if you can do those three things, I think that you have to feel like the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be victorious in this game, because I think that offensively they have the talents, and I do think that they're going to be a better offensive team than they were last year. And one of the things that you talked about earlier as well is the Chiefs played their offense and their defense in the preseason. So they got some snaps. They got some rust off, and I do think that could make it a little bit of an advantage to Kansas City as well.
Yeah, and I think that it is interesting kind of how teams have approached the preseason in recent years. Yep. And Baltimore obviously has dealt with a bunch of injuries in the preseason, and big ones like J.K. Dobbins tearing his ACL back in 2021, which I'm sure has factored into that. But teams do it differently. And it's really a case study between two very different things.
And then you're in a situation where you have to wonder if, because they didn't they didn't play their team in the first or in the preseason games, are they going to come out stagnant in the first game? Are they going to come out a little rusty? Are they going to come out and be as crisp as you would wish them to be, because they haven't had that kind of experience this year? And everybody says it, and I know a lot of people don't believe it, but there is a real difference between practice and game when it comes to speed. So something to watch there.
Yeah, risk reward for all these teams. And again, everybody does it differently here. But Chris, let's get into some predictions for both of us. And of course, predictions here. We got to go back and look. This episode of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs, it is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. Predictions. I'll start since I'm the away team. I think, to me, there's a lot of built-up emotion for both these teams. Obviously, the Chiefs and the whole reveal, the back-to-back Super Bowl championships, and the ceremonies that go with that, and trying to get off to a fast start, especially, look, they were in this position last year. And like I mentioned, and you mentioned as well, they lost to Detroit in that fashion. Now, again, the fashion was a little weird how they lost, but again, some of those players, not on the team anymore, mainly Kadarius Toney. But I do think that the Ravens, they've said all the right things. They've said, look, this is a new year. We're looking forward. We're looking ahead. I'd be pretty shocked if there wasn't any bit of, man, we really wanted it last year and we couldn't get it done. Now, my opinion on the whole revenge thing is it can't be regular season revenge. It's not a revenge game. The revenge would come in the playoffs, if anything. And even then, you're not getting that 2023 championship game back. But I think Baltimore comes out fired up. I think they're going to have some rust. I would agree with you. I don't think it's going to be sunshine and rainbows for 4 quarters, especially not against a team like Kansas City, who you have to bring your A game against. But I'm going to say it is, at least from the final score perspective, I'll go 26-23 Ravens is my final, in a close game that really comes down to the wire. And honestly, it might come down to a Justin Tucker or Harrison Butker field goal at the end. I wouldn't be shocked if that were the case.
Yeah, and I can see that, and I'm going to go a little bit higher of a score. I'm going to go 34-28 Kansas City, and the reason I'm doing that is because when I watch Kansas City in the past, it's a question of, can their defense be good enough? And when you look at what they're going into without L'Jarius Sneed this year, without knowing who CB2 is, and having a couple of different questions on the defensive side, I think that they're going to be giving up points in this game. But I do think that their offense has shown enough and has been connected enough at training camp that it's going to be something that they're going to be able to go out there and score a lot of points.
Yeah, and part of it to me too is, the reason why I went lower scoring is the fact that I do think Zach Orr, in his first ever game as defensive coordinator for the Ravens, this defense has a lot of chess pieces and playmakers, much like the Chiefs offense does. I think that we might see something a little similar to what happened in the AFC Championship game, where the Chiefs get off to a decently fast start, but then the Ravens defense kind of reels it in. The Chiefs did not score a point in the second half of the AFC Championship game. It was really the Ravens offense that could not get it going and allowed Kansas City to sneak out of there with a win. And the Chiefs obviously made big plays throughout the game. But maybe we see something similar where Mahomes gets the better of Zach Orr, and Andy Reid gets the better of Zach Orr for that first couple of quarters, and then we see the defense kind of start to dial it in a little bit. And with the offense for both teams, again, you can't make mistakes as a defense, or else they will absolutely make you pay for it. So I'm going Ravens. Chris is going Chiefs. Big game tonight. And we will both see you back here for post-game content on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs. So be sure, again, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on YouTube, follow along in audio form. Chris, always a blast talking with you. I'm hoping for a good game.
I'm hoping it's a great game as well, Kevin. Always have fun.
Absolutely. We'll be back here again, post-game content, Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And we will see you right back here soon on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Chiefs.